In this video, I'm going to tell you more about 3 huge Shopify mistakes that I see developers make all the time. If you can avoid these 3 mistakes, you will be ahead of 99% of the Shopify developers out there. And stick around for mistake number 2, because I actually made this one myself, and it almost led to me destroying my client's website. So stick around for that. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so mistake number 1, using the built-in Shopify theme code editor. For the love of all that is good, please don't do this. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to download the Shopify CLI and use the Shopify CLI and your terminal on your computer to pull down, to connect to the Shopify store you're working on, pull down the active theme, and then work on it inside of a code editor like VS Code or whatever code editor you're comfortable with. You are not supposed to edit the theme code directly. Now you can do that, but it's really hard to work in. It's really easy to make mistakes. And if you care about your clients, you definitely shouldn't be doing that. That's mistake number 1. And by the way, before we move on, if you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say Shopify CLI, go on Google and look up how to use the Shopify CLI. Okay, so mistake number 2, and this is the one that I'm guilty of, not understanding how to properly work with GitHub and Git in Shopify themes. Git is one of those things that I've always been bad at working with, and I didn't think it was a big deal for a while. You know, I was always able to push up my code, make commits whenever I wanted, but eventually I ran into some issues. So before I even talk about it, for those of you that have no idea what I'm talking about, Git and GitHub is a version control system you can use to keep track of the current state of your code. For example, let's say you're working on a project for a client. You create a GitHub repository of the initial version of their project before you start working on the project. And then you create updates in the repository of all the stuff that you're doing, so that if you ever need to run your code back, you made some huge mistake, you need the previous version of your code, you can always go into GitHub and use Git to restore previous versions of your client's Shopify theme, so that you can sleep easy at night knowing that you can make mistakes freely and be able to fix them whenever you want. If you don't track things with GitHub and with Git, sometimes you'll make changes, you have no idea what changed, you have no idea when it was changed. Sometimes it can end up being a disaster, which is exactly what happened to me. So I wasn't that good at using Git and GitHub. So what you're supposed to do is when you set up a GitHub repository, there is a master or a main branch that stores like the most up-to-date version of the code. And when you're working on it, you create your own branch to work in. Now, my mistake was that as I was working in my branch, I wasn't updating it every day. So there were other developers working on the project. They're making their updates. Their updates have their own timeline. My update has my timeline, right? The update that I was making took me about a month to finish. So I finished it, and then I would reach out to the lead developer on the project. He told me push up my work through GitHub to the master branch, right? Which is what I was trying to do. He reviewed my pull request. He said, okay, everything looks good. And then he told me to merge in my pull request to the master branch. Here is where I made the mistake. So other developers on the team had recently pushed up their code to the master branch as well. I wasn't pulling down their updates as they were making them. So when I pushed up my code's timeline was out of sync with the master branch timeline. That led to something that I know all developers hate, a merge conflict. I hate merge conflicts. The merge conflict I ended up creating, the timeline of my code was mixed up with the timeline of somebody else's code. So their code was overriding my changes. Some of my code was overriding their changes. It was a huge mess. And I didn't realize that what I did until after I pushed to production. So I literally destroyed months of work other developers on our team were doing. And when I realized it, I was like, oh crap, I need to fix this before somebody else notices. So I ended up reverting the master branch to the previous state using Git before I made my pull request. And then I made my request again. And this time, when I merged all the code that I did, I squashed it and merged it to the top of the timeline. So essentially, the change that I made there is I took the timeline of my changes and I had them all put themselves after the timeline of the other changes the developers made. For the developers watching that are experienced with Git, they definitely know what I'm talking about. If some of you watching are like, Patrick, what the hell are you talking about? It doesn't matter. Point is, When you're working on projects with more than one developer as a Shopify developer, you need to have a proper understanding of the ins and outs of how to use Git and GitHub. That way, you can properly restore previous version of the code if you make mistakes. Whatever thing you're pushing up doesn't conflict with the code somebody else pushed up. And that leads me to problem number 3, using too many JavaScript libraries in a Shopify theme. Lord have mercy. This is the one that really gets under my skin. I have seen some crazy code bases, okay? But this one, I wanted to pull my hair out. I don't even have that much hair to pull out, but I was really trying to dig in there and pull it out because this code base went crazy. I'm gonna tell you exactly what happened. Okay, so I was doing some work for a Shopify brand. It was a coffee shop. They hired me to do some work for them, and they had an issue with their cart. Usually on Shopify, if you add something to cart, the cart counter in the top right cart icon will go up. So imagine a customer has 5 things in their cart. They add something new to cart. Now it's supposed to say 6, right? Whenever the person added the thing to cart, the cart counter in the header of the Shopify website wasn't increasing. That's confusing because most people when they're shopping on e-commerce stores, they expect that counter to go up, showing them that they successfully added something to their cart. So that was one of the things that I had to fix. But this was a nightmare to deal with. Now, if you're ever working on this type of problem in a Shopify theme, what you're supposed to do is use the Shopify Cart API and the Shopify Sections API to properly update the cart counter. But I couldn't do that. Why couldn't I do that? The reason why I couldn't do it was because the person that built the first version of the Shopify website that I was working on is crazy. They built this Shopify theme using a whole bunch of Shopify JavaScript libraries that they did not need. They had jQuery on there, they had Alpine JS on there, they had Slick Slider on there, they had their own custom built cart.js file. I'm like, what the hell is happening here? Know what I mean? So having to work with somebody else's code is always annoying, but this time it was especially annoying because they were just doing too much. Man, that project really drove me crazy. But the point I'm trying to make here is don't go too crazy with JavaScript libraries. Like the project that I was on, they even had Shopify Hydrogen on there, which is something you're supposed to use for headless development. So clearly, taking a look at this code base, these people couldn't make a decision about how they wanted to structure their code and what they wanted to do. But you're not going to be like that. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about exactly what it is you intend to do with a JavaScript library before you start using it. And as you use it, maybe write some documentation in there just describing, hey, this is what this is for, this is what we're trying to do, and stuff like that. At least so that when a developer like me comes in afterwards and they work on it, we don't have to try to pull our hair out. Okay, that's it. Those are my 3 Shopify developer mistakes that I think you should avoid if you want to really level up and become a better Shopify developer. Now, if you enjoyed this upload, you enjoyed this video, check out my most recent upload. I think you'll really like it. Either way, hope to see you in there, and thanks for watching.